They were measuring my lake house before anyone even asked me for it. That was the first sign something was terribly wrong. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee trembling in my hands, staring at two men in orange safety vests walking across my frozen backyard with clipboards and tape measures. One of them hammered a small red flag into the snow near the dock my late husband built 32 years ago. My lake house sat on 12 acres of quiet land in northern Wisconsin, tucked against Lake Waverly like it had been carved into the earth itself. It was my sanctuary. My husband, Richard, and I bought it for $98,000 back in 1989. Now it was worth close to $1.8 million. Not that I cared about the money. To me, it was where Richard taught our son Daniel how to fish. It was where I scattered part of Richard's ashes after he passed 6 years ago. It was home. And now strangers were measuring it. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside, the December air biting through my sweater. "Excuse me," I called. "What exactly are you doing on my property?" The taller man glanced at his clipboard. "We were hired for a pre-sale boundary verification, ma'am." Pre-sale. The word hit me like ice water. "By who?" He looked down again. "Vanessa Carter. My daughter-in-law." I stood there in the snow, my boots sinking 2 inches deep, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Vanessa had never asked me about selling. Never even hinted at it. But then again, Vanessa rarely asked for anything. She simply acted like it was already hers. By 5 o'clock, the house was glowing with Christmas lights, the smell of ham and cinnamon filling the air. My son Daniel had arrived with Vanessa and my 2 grandkids, Ethan and Lily. The children ran upstairs laughing while Vanessa walked in like she owned the place, carrying 3 designer shopping bags and wearing a white wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to. "Margaret," she said with a tight smile, kissing the air beside my cheek. "This place looks wonderful. Cozy as always." Cozy. Like it wasn't the house I'd spent half my life building. Daniel hugged me quickly, distracted. Checking his phone. He had been different lately. Distant. Nervous. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked excited. Too excited. During dinner, I kept watching them. Little glances. Quiet whispers. Daniel avoiding eye contact. Vanessa smiling every time she looked around the dining room. Like she was imagining something. Then dessert came. Pumpkin pie. My late husband's favorite recipe. That was when Vanessa stood up, tapped her wine glass with a fork, and smiled at everyone. "Before we open gifts," she said, "Daniel and I have an announcement." I felt my stomach tighten. Daniel stared at his plate. Vanessa placed a hand on his shoulder and beamed. "We've been thinking a lot about the future. About family. About legacy." Her eyes landed on me. "And we've decided it's time for a new chapter." I looked at Daniel. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Vanessa smiled wider. "Margaret, this house is too much for one person now. It's isolated, expensive, and honestly," she paused, laughing softly, "a little wasted on just you." The room went silent. Even the kids stopped moving. I set my fork down carefully. "What are you saying?" Vanessa leaned forward like she was doing me a favor. "We think it would be best if you gave us the lake house for Christmas. The kids need room. Daniel needs stability. And you could move into something smaller. Maybe a condo near town." My chest went cold. Daniel finally looked up, but not at me. At the table. Like he already knew this was coming. Like he'd let it happen. Then I remembered the men outside. The measuring tape. The red flags in the snow. They weren't planning. They were preparing. And suddenly, I understood something much worse than greed. They weren't asking for my home. They had already decided it belonged to them. For a moment, nobody moved. The Christmas lights blinked softly around the dining room, and the only sound was the ticking of Richard's old wall clock above the fireplace. Vanessa stood there smiling like she had just announced a surprise vacation instead of asking for my home. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But he just cleared his throat and folded his hands together. That silence told me everything. He knew. He had known all along. Daniel? I asked quietly. He finally looked up. Mom, we have been talking about this for months. Months. The word felt heavier than I expected. Months of planning. Months of talking about my house behind my back. Talking about what? I asked. Vanessa sat down slowly, crossing her legs like she was stepping into a business meeting. About what makes sense, she said. Look around, Margaret. This place is huge. 4 bedrooms. 3 bathrooms. 12 acres. It is too much for you. I stared at her. Too much for me? She nodded. You are 72. You barely use half the property. The dock needs repairs. The roof will need replacing in a couple years. The taxes alone are over $14,000 a year. That caught my attention. She knew the taxes. She knew details nobody would know unless they had been looking into the property. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, we are not trying to hurt you. We are just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead? I repeated. By sending surveyors onto my land? His face changed. Just for a second. Surprise. Fear. Vanessa jumped in fast. Oh, so you saw that. She smiled like it was no big deal. That was just practical. We needed to know the exact property lines before making plans. Before making plans. Not if. Before. My grandson Ethan looked confused. Mom, are we moving here? Vanessa smiled at him. Maybe, sweetheart. Then she turned back to me. Think about it. The kids would have the lake. Fresh air. A better school district. Daniel could work remotely. It is the perfect family home. Family home. As if I was not family anymore. I took a sip of water to steady myself. And where exactly do you expect me to go? Vanessa tilted her head. There is a retirement community in Madison. They have lovely condos. Small. Safe. Easy to manage. The way she said small made it sound like a gift. Daniel nodded. We even looked at a few online. That hit harder than anything else. They had picked my future for me. Without asking. Without even considering what this house meant to me. I looked around the dining room. Richard built this table with his own hands. The beams overhead came from wood he cut himself. The fireplace stones were laid one by one over an entire summer. Every inch of this place carried him. And now my own son was acting like it was just square footage. Vanessa reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. A folder. On Christmas Eve. She slid it across the table toward me. We made it easy, she said. These are transfer papers. If you sign before New Year's, we can close everything by February. I stared at the folder but did not touch it. My granddaughter Lily whispered, Grandma, are you okay? I forced a smile at her. I am fine, sweetheart. But inside, I was beginning to see the full shape of what they had done. The surveyors. The real estate plans. The paperwork. This was never a conversation. This was an operation. A carefully timed ambush wrapped in Christmas ribbons. Vanessa leaned closer and lowered her voice. Margaret, this is the best thing for everyone. Do not make this harder than it has to be. And right then, I realized something chilling. Vanessa was not nervous. She was confident. Confident because she thought she already knew everything about this house. But there was one thing she did not know. One thing buried beneath the floorboards, behind steel and concrete, waiting in the basement where Richard told me never to let anyone touch. I looked at the folder sitting on my dining table, my name printed neatly across the top in black ink, and for a long moment, I said nothing. Vanessa kept watching me with that polished little smile, like she was already picturing new furniture in my living room. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to stop any of this. That told me where he stood. I folded my hands in my lap and took a slow breath. Richard used to tell me something whenever business got ugly. Never react in the moment. Let people show you exactly who they are. Tonight, they were showing me everything. Vanessa cleared her throat. Margaret, we are only trying to help. This house needs a family in it. It needs life. I almost laughed at that. This house had seen more life than she could imagine. Birthdays. Summers. Christmas mornings. My son's first broken arm after jumping off the dock when he was 10. Richard teaching Daniel how to split firewood behind the garage. 40 years of life. But I kept my face calm. And you think that family is yours? I asked. Vanessa blinked, surprised at my tone. Daniel jumped in quickly. Mom, that is not fair. Fair? I said. You had surveyors here without telling me. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We were trying to get ahead of things. Vanessa leaned in again. Exactly. This is not personal. It is practical. Practical. That word again. Everything with Vanessa was practical when it benefited her. I looked down at the transfer papers. I did not open them. Instead, I pushed the folder back toward her. Her smile faded for a second. No, I said. Her face hardened. No? I nodded. Not tonight. Daniel let out a breath, like he had been holding it. Vanessa sat straighter. Margaret, with respect, delaying this only makes it harder. I looked directly at her. Hard for who? That made her quiet. The room felt smaller now. The kids had gone back upstairs, thankfully too distracted by Christmas movies to understand what was happening below. Daniel stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. Mom, he said softly, we are trying to build something. We need this. Need. Not want. Need. I knew that tone. It was the same tone he used when he was 16 asking for a truck I could not afford. But this was different. A truck cost $20,000. This house held my entire life. And still, something in Daniel's voice felt rehearsed, like Vanessa had fed him every line. I stood up slowly. My knees ached from the cold weather, but I stood tall. You want the house? I said. Vanessa's eyes lit up. Yes. I nodded once. Fine. Daniel spun around. What? Vanessa almost smiled too quickly. Really? I looked at both of them. Yes. You can have it. Silence. Pure shock. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly. Daniel stared like he had misheard me. There is just one condition, I said. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. What condition? I walked toward the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and kept my back to them. Before anything is signed, before anything changes hands, I want the basement cleaned out. Daniel frowned. The basement? Yes. Vanessa laughed nervously. That old storage space? I nodded. 30 years of boxes. Tools. Furniture. Richard's things. If you want this house so badly, you can start there. Vanessa looked relieved, almost amused. That is it. I turned and smiled for the first time all night. That is it. She exchanged a look with Daniel, and I could see her calculating. Easy enough, she thought. Just a dirty basement. But Richard's basement was never just a basement. Beneath those concrete floors, behind that old steel door hidden past the furnace room, sat something neither of them could ever have prepared for. And for the first time that night, I let Vanessa believe she was winning. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Vanessa was already downstairs. I heard her boots on the basement steps before I even finished my coffee. She was eager, almost cheerful, like cleaning out old boxes was the final little inconvenience before she claimed her prize. Daniel was still asleep upstairs with the kids, but Vanessa had been awake since sunrise. That did not surprise me. People like Vanessa never slept well when money was close. I sat in the kitchen, staring out at the frozen lake, listening to the muffled sounds below me. Boxes scraping. Metal clanking. Her annoyed sighs every few minutes. The basement stretched nearly 40 feet beneath the house, built in stages over the years. Richard expanded it twice, Once after Daniel was born and again after his construction company took off in the late 1990s. Most people thought it was just storage. Old fishing gear. Holiday decorations. Broken chairs. But Richard had built deeper than anyone knew. Around 9, Daniel came down rubbing his eyes. "She is really doing it?" he asked. I nodded. "Seems so." He looked uneasy. "Mom, about last night." I cut him off. "Save it." He stood there awkwardly, then glanced toward the basement door. "Vanessa says once this is done, we can start the paperwork." I stirred my coffee. "That is what she thinks." He frowned, like he wanted to ask what I meant, but he let it go. "Smart." Around noon, Vanessa came up covered in dust, her expensive sweater ruined by cobwebs and dirt. She looked irritated. "That basement is a disaster," she said. I looked up from my crossword puzzle. 40 years of living tends to do that. She rolled her eyes. "There are hundreds of boxes." "Then I guess you have your work cut out for you." She narrowed her eyes, realizing I was not helping. "Daniel should be helping me." I looked at my son. He immediately stood up, but Vanessa waved him off. "No. I will do it. Faster this way." That told me everything. She did not want witnesses if she found something valuable. Richard always said greed makes people careless. By 2 o'clock, the house was quiet again except for her footsteps below. Then I heard it. 3 loud bangs against metal. Not pipes. Not boxes. The steel door. I felt my pulse quicken. I had not heard that sound in 6 years. Vanessa came storming upstairs, breathing hard. "Margaret." I looked up calmly. "Yes?" "There is a locked room down there." I let the silence hang. "Is there?" Her face tightened. "Do not play games. There is a steel door behind the furnace room." "Why?" I folded my newspaper. "Storage. Storage does not need a vault door." "Vault. Interesting word choice." Daniel looked confused. "Mom, what is she talking about?" I stood slowly. "Your father liked to keep important things secure." Vanessa stepped closer. "Important things like what?" There it was. Not memories. Not family history. Money. Always money. I reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out an old brass key. Heavy. Worn. Richard gave it to me the week before he died. He told me only one thing. When the truth needs to come out, open the door. I held the key in my hand for a second, feeling its weight. Vanessa's eyes locked onto it like a hawk spotting prey. Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom, what is in there?" I looked at both of them. "I guess it is time we all found out." Vanessa smiled. She actually smiled. She thought this was it. Hidden cash. Gold. Maybe deeds. Something she could use. But she still did not understand the difference between finding treasure and finding truth. And sometimes, truth costs far more than money. The 3 of us stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, staring at the steel door hidden behind the old furnace room. Dust covered the frame, and the concrete walls around it looked older than the rest of the house, darker somehow, like they had been poured separately. Vanessa stood closest, arms crossed, impatient. Daniel looked nervous, his eyes bouncing between me and the key in my hand. I had not stood in front of that door since Richard's funeral. 6 years. 6 years of silence, secrets, and promises. Richard built this room himself after his company expanded. He spent nearly 8 months down here after work, every night, welding and pouring concrete. When I asked what he was doing, he always said the same thing. Protecting the future. Back then, I thought he meant money. I understood later that he meant much more than that. Vanessa tapped her foot. "Well?" she said sharply. "Open it." I slid the brass key into the lock. The mechanism groaned like it had been asleep for decades. 1 turn. 2 turns. Then a heavy click. Daniel stepped back. I pulled the handle, and the door opened inward with a long metallic scrape across the floor. Inside was not what Vanessa expected. No stacks of cash. No bars of gold. No jewels. Just rows of filing cabinets, old shelves, boxes, and a long oak desk covered with dust. A single overhead light flickered on automatically when the door opened. Richard had wired it that way. Vanessa frowned immediately. "This is it?" I stepped inside slowly. "This is it." The room was about 20 feet long, maybe 15 wide. Organized. Exact. Richard's style. Every drawer labeled. Every shelf numbered. Daniel walked to the desk, running his fingers over the dust. "I never knew this was here." "Your father wanted it that way," I said. Vanessa moved quickly, opening drawers, flipping through folders. I watched her face. First disappointment. Then curiosity. Then hunger. "These are property records," she said. "Investment accounts." Her voice changed. "Margaret, there are dozens of them." I sat in Richard's old chair and looked around the room. I remembered him sitting here late at night, making lists, writing letters, preparing for things I never fully understood. Daniel opened a file cabinet. Marked Trust. His hands froze. "Mom!" I looked up. "What?" He held up a thick binder. The front read, Hayes Family Legacy Trust. Vanessa stepped over so fast she nearly knocked him aside. "Give me that." She opened it, flipping pages, scanning numbers. Her eyes widened. $12.8 million? The room went silent. Daniel stared at her. "What?" She shoved the papers into his hands. He read them, his face draining color. I stayed quiet. Vanessa looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You never told us." I folded my hands. "You never asked?" Her breathing changed. Faster now. Excited. Calculating. "This changes everything," she whispered. But she was wrong. It changed nothing. Not yet. Daniel kept flipping through the binder. Stocks. Rental properties. Business shares. Trust accounts. All under Richard's name. All protected. Vanessa suddenly smiled. "Well, this makes the house transfer even easier." I looked at her. "How so?" She laughed softly. "Because now we know you will be fine without it. More than fine." There it was again. That greed. That inability to stop. Even after finding millions, she still wanted the house. Daniel looked uneasy. "Vanessa." But she ignored him. She was already looking deeper into the trust binder. Then her eyes landed on a tab marked Conditions. She reached for it, but I put my hand over the page. "Not that one," I said. Her smile disappeared. "Why not?" I looked straight at her. "Because that part decides who gets everything. And trust me, you are going to want to hear it very carefully." I kept my hand pressed on the trust binder while Vanessa stared at me, her eyes sharp and restless, like she was trying to calculate how fast she could get control of everything in this room. Daniel stood beside her, still flipping through the pages he had already read, his hands shaking slightly. $12.8 million. Even I remembered the first time Richard told me the number. It was not just money. It was years of land deals, construction contracts, and careful investments spread across 3 states. Richard always believed in building something that could outlive him. But he also believed people changed when money appeared. That was why he created Conditions. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Margaret, if there are conditions, we deserve to know them." Deserve. That word almost made me smile. I slowly pulled the binder closer and opened to the marked section. The paper was yellowed slightly, signed and notarized years ago. Richard's handwriting was still there in the margins, neat and exact. I could almost hear his voice. Daniel leaned in. Vanessa stood so close beside him their shoulders touched, both staring down at the page. I began reading aloud. "The Hayes Family Legacy Trust shall remain under the full control of my wife, Margaret Hayes, for the duration of her natural life." Vanessa's jaw tightened immediately. Not what she wanted to hear. I continued. Upon Margaret Hayes choosing to transfer ownership of the lake property, or upon her passing, all trust assets shall be reviewed and distributed according to the following conditions. Daniel swallowed hard. Vanessa's eyes stayed fixed on the page. Then I read the next line. The line Richard told me would reveal people for who they truly were. Any direct family member, spouse, or beneficiary found to have pressured, manipulated, or coerced Margaret Hayes into surrendering ownership of the lake property shall be permanently disqualified from receiving any trust assets. Silence. Total silence. Vanessa blinked first. Daniel's face went pale. What? He whispered. I looked up at him. Your father was very specific. Vanessa snatched the binder from the desk. That cannot be legal. Her voice was sharp now. Angry. Panicked. I stood up slowly. It was drafted by one of the best estate attorneys in Chicago. She flipped through the pages faster, searching for loopholes. There were none. Richard never left loose ends. Daniel stepped back like the floor had shifted under him. Mom, you knew this? I nodded. Since the day he died. His voice cracked. Why did you not tell me? I looked at him for a long moment. Because your father told me the trust would reveal what words never could. Vanessa slammed the binder onto the desk. This is ridiculous. Nobody pressured you. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She froze. I walked toward the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder she had handed me at dinner. The transfer papers. You brought legal documents to Christmas Eve dinner, I said. You sent surveyors onto my property before asking. You researched my taxes. You found retirement condos for me. You made plans for my house without my permission. Daniel looked at Vanessa, his face tightening. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. Real doubt. Vanessa laughed nervously. That is not coercion. That is planning. Maybe, I said. But Richard thought differently. Daniel sat down heavily in the old wooden chair, staring at the floor. Vanessa, did you know about this clause? She looked at him. Of course not. But her tone was different now. Less confident. Colder. She was losing control of the room, and she knew it. Then Daniel noticed something else inside the binder. Another tab. Smaller. Handwritten. It simply said private letter. He looked at me. What is this? I stared at the envelope. My stomach tightened. I had never opened it. Richard told me not to unless the trust was challenged. And now, for the first time in 6 years, I realized Christmas was about to uncover far more than money. The envelope sat on the desk between us, yellowed at the edges, sealed with Richard's initials pressed into dark red wax. For 6 years, I had left it untouched. I honored his instructions because I trusted him. But now, with Daniel staring at me like he no longer knew his own family and Vanessa pacing like a trapped animal, I knew the moment had come. I picked it up carefully. It felt heavier than paper should. Daniel looked at me. What did Dad say about it? I swallowed. He told me only to open it if the trust was ever challenged or if someone tried to force my hand over this house. Vanessa stopped pacing. Nobody forced anything. Her voice sounded weaker now, like even she did not believe it. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Richard's handwriting stared back at me, strong and familiar. My chest tightened. Even after all these years, seeing his words felt like hearing his voice. I began reading aloud. To my wife, Margaret. If you are opening this, then it means someone close to us has shown their true intentions. I am sorry for that. Daniel lowered his eyes. Vanessa stood still, arms folded tight. I kept reading. This lake house is not just a home. It is the cornerstone of everything I built. It was the first property I ever bought, and every major investment after that was tied to it. Daniel looked confused. Tied how? I flipped the next page. Richard had attached diagrams, deeds, account numbers. Then I saw it. A property sale agreement dated 18 months ago. Signed by Vanessa. My eyes narrowed. What is this? Vanessa stepped forward fast. Too fast. She saw it before Daniel did. Her face drained instantly. Daniel grabbed the paper from my hand. Vanessa? His voice shook. It was a contract with a real estate developer from Milwaukee. An agreement to sell the lake house for $2.4 million once ownership transferred. Signed. Planned. Ready. Before she ever asked me for the house. Before Christmas. Before the surveyors. Everything had been arranged. Daniel looked up at her stunned. You already planned to sell it? Vanessa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then she tried. It was just an option. A backup plan. Daniel stood up. A backup plan? His voice rose. You said this was for us. For the kids. Vanessa shook her head quickly. It was. But if the offer was good enough, we could use the money for something bigger. Daniel stared at her like a stranger. I watched it happen in real time. The trust was doing exactly what Richard said it would. Revealing truth. But Richard's letter was not finished. I kept reading. If you find this letter, look in drawer 7, file 19. I turned to the filing cabinet and pulled it open. Inside was a thin folder labeled Daniel. My hands trembled as I opened it. Medical bills. Loan statements. Credit reports. More than $300,000 in unpaid debt. Daniel grabbed the papers. What is this? I looked at him. Your father paid off your debts twice. Quietly. He kept records. Daniel's face went white. Vanessa looked away. That told me enough. She knew. She had known everything. Richard's final note sat clipped to the front. I read it aloud. My son is kind, but weak when led by stronger voices. Protect him if you can. But protect yourself first. Daniel sat back down, stunned into silence. Vanessa's perfect mask was gone now. No more charm. No more polished words. Just anger. Cold, sharp anger. She looked at me and said something that finally confirmed everything. Fine. I wanted the house. I wanted the money. So what? You are sitting on millions while your own family struggles. I stared at her. And in that moment, I realized the trust had exposed more than greed. It had exposed betrayal that ran far deeper than I ever imagined. The room felt colder after Vanessa said it. Not because of the basement, not because it was December in Wisconsin, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light. Daniel sat frozen in Richard's chair, the debt papers spread across his lap like pieces of a life he did not recognize anymore. Vanessa stood across from me, breathing hard, her face red with frustration, no longer pretending to be the loving daughter-in-law. She had dropped the mask completely. You think this is fair? She said. $12.8 million sitting here while we are drowning? I looked at her calmly. Drowning in what, Vanessa? Dead? Or greed? Daniel lifted his head. What debts? His voice was hollow. Vanessa turned toward him, her expression shifting fast. Softer. Calculated. Daniel, do not do this right now. But it was too late. He looked down at the papers again. Credit cards. Personal loans. A second mortgage on their house. Lines of debt stretching back almost 4 years. Some with Vanessa's signature. Some with his. Some he clearly did not know about. $312,000? He whispered. Vanessa crossed her arms. We needed it. For what? He asked. She hesitated. Then Daniel found another folder. Jewelry purchases. Luxury vacations. Designer clothing. More than $80,000 in 2 years. His face changed. It was not anger yet. It was worse. It was realization. You said we were behind because of the kids, he said. Vanessa snapped back. Do not act innocent. You like the life too. I let them speak. Richard always said the hardest truths are the ones people uncover themselves. Then footsteps came from upstairs. Ethan and Lily. I immediately closed the trust binder. The children appeared at the basement stairs, confused by the raised voices. Ethan looked at his father. Dad? Is everything okay? Daniel forced a weak smile. Go back upstairs, buddy. Lily looked at Vanessa. Mom? Vanessa inhaled sharply and waved them off. Go watch your movie. Once they were gone, the silence returned. Heavy. Sharp. Daniel stood up slowly. You planned to sell Mom's house before she even agreed. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Because somebody had to think ahead. That was not thinking ahead, he said. That was stealing. She laughed bitterly. Stealing? From who? Your mother has more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. That was when I heard it. A car door outside. I looked toward the basement stairs. Right on time. Richard always believed timing mattered. A minute later, footsteps came through the kitchen above. Slow. Deliberate. Then a familiar voice called down. Margaret? I smiled faintly. Down here, Thomas. Thomas Avery stepped into the basement wearing his long wool coat, snow still on his shoulders. Richard's attorney. He had been with us for 25 years. Vanessa's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. Thomas looked around the room, taking in the papers, the open binder, the tension. I take it the trust has been opened, he said. I nodded. He removed a folder from his briefcase. Then there is one final matter. Vanessa stepped forward. What final matter? Thomas adjusted his glasses. Richard Hayes left explicit instructions. If evidence of coercion, manipulation, or prearranged sale attempts were discovered, I was to file immediate beneficiary removal notices. Daniel stared at him. Removal? Thomas nodded. From the trust. Permanently. Vanessa's face turned white. That is insane. Thomas calmly placed the Milwaukee sale contract on top of the folder. You signed this 18 months ago. That qualifies. Daniel looked like he could barely breathe. Both of us? Thomas looked at him carefully. That depends on intent. I stared at my son. 4. The first time in years, I saw something honest in his face. Regret. And now, everything rested on what he would say next. The basement was so quiet I could hear the old furnace humming behind the wall. Thomas Avery stood near the steel door, holding the beneficiary removal documents in one hand, waiting. Vanessa looked like she had been drained of all color. Daniel stood in the center of the room, staring at the papers, the trust, the sale contract, the debt reports, all of it spread across Richard's desk like evidence in a trial. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Daniel finally lifted his head. I did not know about the sale. His voice was low, unsteady, but clear. Thomas studied him carefully. Did you know your wife intended to sell the property once ownership transferred? Daniel shook his head. No. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Daniel, stop pretending. We talked about options. He turned toward her. Options are not signed contracts, Vanessa. She folded her arms, furious now. So what? I was trying to save us. Daniel looked at the luxury purchase statements still in his hand. Save us from what? The vacations? The jewelry? The designer bags? She said nothing. That silence said enough. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Margaret, the trust gives you discretion regarding Daniel. If you believe he acted without intent to coerce, he may remain a beneficiary. Vanessa, however, is clearly disqualified. Vanessa stepped forward. You cannot do this. Thomas looked at her calmly. It has already been done. He handed her the legal notice. She grabbed it with shaking hands, scanning the pages. Her eyes moved faster and faster, like she was looking for a way out. There was none. Richard had made sure of that. Daniel looked at me. For the first time that night, I saw my son again. Not the weak man Richard warned me about. Just my boy. Lost. Ashamed. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I am sorry. I should have seen this. I should have stopped it. I looked at him for a long moment. There was pain in his face, but also truth. Real truth. And after everything Richard left behind, I knew that was the point. Not punishment. Clarity. Your father believed people can be weak, I said. But weakness is not the same as betrayal. Daniel lowered his head. Vanessa stared at both of us like we had turned against her. So that is it? She snapped. You just forgive him? I looked at her. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She laughed once, cold and sharp, then threw the legal notice onto the desk. Keep your house. Keep your money. She stormed upstairs, her heels pounding against the wooden steps. A few minutes later we heard the front door slam. Then silence. Daniel sat down heavily, rubbing his face. The kids? I nodded. They can stay tonight. They should not carry this. He looked at me, tears in his eyes. I do not know what happens now. Thomas closed his briefcase. That part is up to you. By Christmas morning, the house felt different. Lighter somehow. Snow covered the lake in a clean white blanket, untouched. Ethan and Lily opened presents by the fireplace, laughing like children should. Daniel sat quietly on the couch, watching them, carrying the weight of what he had learned. Vanessa never came back. Thomas had filed the trust changes before sunrise. Her name was gone. Permanently. Later that afternoon, after everyone was asleep, I walked down to the basement one last time. I locked the steel door and placed Richard's letter back inside. Then I carried one final envelope upstairs, the one he wrote only for me. I sat alone by the frozen lake, wrapped in my old wool blanket, and opened it. The last line made me smile through tears. Margaret, if you are reading this, then the house did what it was always meant to do. It protected you. I looked out across the water, the same lake Richard and I built our life beside, and for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than grief. Peace. Because in the end, the house was never about money. It was about truth. And truth had finally found its way home.